Hey everyone, welcome to another session with myself, Abdul Chohan. I'm the VP of Learning at Shobi, and I'm kind of very excited to have Mark Anderson with us today as well. Some of you might know him as ICT evangelist from Twitter and other social media platforms. Just to kind of, for those of you that don't know what Shobi is a hybrid learning platform. It kind of works very simply and reliably to kind of deliver rich, personalized feedback for students and teachers. Got over 3 million users, and we are going to be talking all things edu and tech today. And obviously, it's going to be quite, hopefully, an interesting discussion. I'm sure it will be. Mark and I kind of go back quite a while back. Actually, it's a funny thing. We usually meet at BET or at airports, which sounds really weird, but I'm usually traveling somewhere or Mark's returning from somewhere and so on. Mark, thank you very much. Welcome to have you on the session today.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me to come on and chat and talk about all things technology and teaching and learning as well, obviously. But thank you so much for having me. And you're right about the airports thing, and I'll always remember the night I then had to spend at Amsterdam Schiphol, where I actually missed my connecting flight due to catching up with you. You're like, I'm home, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not.
It's the worst thing, man, when that happens. It's the worst thing when you're kind of almost there, but you've missed a flight or wrong gate or something's happened at the last minute. So just to kind of, for people that are tuning in, a little bit about Mark. He's a former teacher, an SLT member. He's been a global speaker, award-winning blogger. He is an author, consultant. He's head of edu at Net Support Group as well. He's also the co-founder of Global EdTech as well. So lots and lots of different hats. But my first kind of question for you, Mark, just kind of your thoughts on this, is that we're about to kind of go back into school season, and I think it's probably fair to say that this is probably going to be a unique experience in many ways after the last 18 months or so. So, you know what, and obviously teachers, certainly in my eyes, I've heard some amazing things that teachers have done. The learning curve has been kind of pretty crazy. So what are your thoughts on like teacher development over the last 18 months?
Well, it's funny because teacher development over the last 18 months doesn't really mirror what is actual sort of statutory teacher training, does it? If we look at the teacher standards, and who would argue with the teacher standards? There are things on there, promote good progress and outcomes by pupils, set high expectations, which inspire and motivate and challenge pupils. Nobody would argue against those things, but where within there are the things like using technology effectively to support teaching and learning, and a breakdown of those different things. That's what we really need alongside the conversation. But boy, if teachers pulled out all the stops in the last 18 months, and not just here in the UK, whether you're talking to teachers in Hong Kong, and who, they had it really early. I'm talking to head teacher Mark Steed and other people in the region, Kobe Reynolds and other teachers out there, who were really hitting it from the ground running, Levent Erdogan, others, and they've had to, teachers have had to really up their game when it came to technology. Historically, we might be asking that question, because we've had such great technology around for such a long time. We could be asking the question, are we nearly there yet? And prior to the pandemic, we really weren't there. But 18 months on, there's that quote, isn't there? Innovation being, necessity being the mother of innovation. And so we've seen that not just from teachers trying to ensure the well-being of their learners, checking in, all these things that wrap around actual teaching and learning, trying to replicate the things, via distance learning that would normally in the classroom. Boy, teachers have had it really, really tough, as have the children. And so, what I really hope when we go back to school, and for some teachers around the world, that's already happening. I'm talking to colleagues, as I'm sure you are, in the Middle East, we're starting to go back into school now, ready for the first day and things, doing some prep and training and inset and all those things. What I really hope is that, people don't feel that they've had to use technology the last 18 months, and now things are getting back to being more normal, new normal, whatever sort of buzz quote you want to call it. We ditch all the great progress that's been made, actually. Because one of the biggest issues, as you know, Abdul, with teaching and learning using technology is the issue around confidence and competence, isn't it? And so teachers have done loads to really bolster and reinforce both of those key areas in ensuring effective technology use in the last 18 months. So, yeah, I mean, I really hope that SLTs and middle leaders can work with their teachers and teams to try and unpick what, because it's all contextual as well, isn't it? What works in one school might not necessarily work in another. You can't sort of take one setup and directly lift it from one into the other. Obviously, there are hallmarks of what a good one looks like, you know. But what's worked in your context, and what can you sort of do with that moving forward is going to be a benefit to your school? And that all ties into that really important topic of digital strategy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it kind of comes back down to that all the time. I think, like, completely kind of what you've just said really resonates with me in many ways, because when we did go into lockdown, there's lots of parts of the world that I've been familiar with in terms of education, because I've been working with lots of schools there, or ministries of education, or districts, and so on. But what was interesting for me was when I first started doing webinars with Shobi, I suddenly started meeting teachers online just during the first 6 months from countries that I've never visited as well. I mean, I'm working with a school in Honduras, you know, it's been fascinating to kind of see their journey. When I first spoke to them and the principal, it was like, we need something in place. Can we have a trial? Can we do this? And so on. And very quickly, they kind of, you know, got onto the concept of hybrid learning and what does that mean and what does that look like. They started then to think about, you know, the geography of learning, like where is it, where can it happen, and the fact that it can happen anywhere, and access and the equity of access and all of those sorts of things. But what was really quite fascinating was that 1 year on, I just did a webinar with them again, just kind of like a recap and refresh. And what was really refreshing to hear from the head teacher was that actually we've seen a lot of efficiencies in the way in which we've been using technology. So when we go back to school, we're going to be bringing those efficiencies with us. We're going to have more flexibility for teachers. We're going to have more access for students. We're going to, you know, change the way in which we, you know, look at the way like learning is delivered. So actually students can continue to access something that's been explained and talked about even after that particular lesson, which historically would have been quite impossible. They've started to use things like Socrates for quizzing, and what does that look like in terms of assessment. So I think for me, and you know, I kind of heard a similar story from Rwanda. You know, head teacher suddenly kind of sprung into action when schools locked down, and you know, got things set up for the students, and students were able to get on just from their mobile phones and so on. So one of the things that and I suppose this leads on to my next question, is this ability to kind of have hybrid practice. Yeah. What examples have you seen of kind of hybrid practice, and where do you see it, or do you see it fitting in, and something that schools should continue to look at beyond, you know, the pandemic and beyond this mad rush of getting technology in?
Well, it's an interesting proposition, Abdul, and it goes in many ways, I think, to the maturity and the age of the students that you're working in, because you couldn't work in the same way, let's say, in a hybrid kind of way that you might work with students in FE, you know, so in college, post-compulsory education, compared to what you might do with children in early years, or even like key stage 3 ages, sort of 11 to 14, because, you know, they're going to be in school, but there are hallmarks to lots of the things that people are choosing to use. If I put my net support hat on for a second, you know, we've got some software that really supports teaching and learning, regardless of the location. A bit like Shobi in that regard, in that you could be in your classroom receiving your assignments and getting your feedback from your teacher, or you could be at home or down a corridor. You know, so we've got software which is agnostic. It works on every device. Classroom.cloud I'm thinking of here. I can see every student's device while they're working on it, whether they're in my classroom, down a corridor, or at home. I can quiz them. I can give feedback, I can lock their screens and draw their attention back to me. And this isn't a tool which is supposed to replace things like Google Meet or Teams or anything like that. And this is a really good sort of companion, a sort of side partner that really facilitates, how you want your teaching to go and their learning to happen. And so there are some hallmarks in here that we can really sort of transplace from this sort of solution. And say that there's parity with Shobi and other things as well. But you're looking for things in a school really where there's consistency of use. So putting yourself in place of the student for a second, you don't want to go from Mr. Anderson to Mr. Chohan and be using, I don't know, one tool, Teams in one class and Google Meet in another class. The students got enough to remember with their academics without having to actually be learning lots and lots of different types of technology for each of their different teachers. So some consistency is important. Ease of use as well. We were talking about StreamYard, the platform we're using for this webinar this afternoon. And it doesn't try and do anything more than it really is supposed to do. It's got some great features. You can put some branding on it. You've got the chat, all these different things. But it doesn't try and do anything more than it's really, really, really supposed to be doing. So there's consistency, ease of use, things like being able to sort of share stuff with parents, other key individuals who are part of their child's or their guardian sort of learning journey. Things where you can recognize success, safeguarding's built in there, obviously. Assessment can take place and feedback can be delivered back really, really quickly. These are the hallmarks of good setup, and the ability to sort of have access to things that are recorded as well. So bringing those up so you can get them anytime, anywhere. And so I don't think it's necessarily a case of sort of throwing a baby out with the bathwater and changing things completely. But look carefully at, say, these sort of key tenets that I'm talking about, the consistency and so forth and so on. And make sure that teachers are confident and happy using these things. And equally, students are knowledgeable about how to make the most of them and all these different things, whilst keeping safeguarding sort of firmly in the back of your head about making sure your young people are being kept safe. And those sort of hallmarks you can take away and apply those sort of things right through the age bands. Absolutely. Obviously, the more that you sort of move up into sort of post 16 and FE and beyond, so you can talk about blending that approach, some face-to-face instruction, some online instruction, some video instruction, these kinds of things. But again, it's about making sure you look at what's best for the age of your learners and the context within which you're working. If you haven't got the technology within your community that's going to facilitate all of this, then it's not going to work. We know about how much of a digital divide has been during the last 18 months as well. So there's lots and lots to consider.
I'm going to definitely come on to that as well. We've got some comments coming in. Ollie's just pitching in there. Ollie Lewis, he's saying that reframing elements of access is something I hope that stays with EdTech. I think that's kind of quite powerful. Absolutely. Got Al Kingsley mentioning that the first step is being receptive to how a hybrid model might add value and impact. I think like these are kind of really, really powerful and quite key things, right? That are worth considering. I think that where schools had a vision around the way in which technology is used effectively, and the equity of access were there, and the tenets that you were just speaking about, Mark. Inevitably, speaking to those schools during pandemic, after the pandemic, they were kind of prepared for that, kind of environment, right? That they could they suddenly discovered that actually we could do this from home, we could do this from school. Yes, there are elements that need to happen face to face, especially considering age groups and so on. But there are things that I feel that technology can add, specifically to assessment and feedback. Which is kind of, I suppose, core to the way in which any learning would happen. So, from your perspective, what are the things that technology allows us to do that we couldn't do without, as far as assessment and feedback are concerned?
Well, it goes to a few things, and I've got a few North Stars that I use when I'm thinking about technology use. I look at research and things that work, for example. So if you look at some of the reports from the Education Endowment Foundation, they talk really clearly about how feedback can be sped up and improved. That links in really nicely with like the work of John Hattie with visible learning and the research that's taken place there. So he says in Visible Learning for Teachers that feedback should be just for me, just in time, just for what I need to move forward in my learning journey. So how can I use technology to make sure feedback is timely and personalized and so forth and so on? So taking all these things on board, and you might have sort of Ruben Puentedura over your shoulder going, let's modify and redefine it and do things that wouldn't bother with the technology and all that sort of stuff, right? Being mindful of that, obviously, I love technology. I'm probably one of the most geeky people right? But it's about balancing that with making sure it's focused on the teaching and learning stuff. And feedback and assessment is one massive area where we can make some huge strides. So whether it's you're choosing to add some quizzing to a video as you're watching that video, like you can in something like Edpuzzle. Whether you're reducing teacher workload by doing low stakes quizzing linked to retrieval practice using Socrative, for example. And Socrative is one of my absolute favorite tools for feedback. I wrote about it. It's one of the first blog posts I wrote about when I started blogging was about Socrative. It's in my first book, so forth and so on. And one of the reasons why I love Socrative as well is you can do these things in a really timely fashion, but what's really nice is that you can flip it back on the learners. You can get them to create quizzes for each other and do all these sort of things as well. And that goes through to the metacognition of everything as well. And so you'll notice I'm talking about some EdTech tools, sure, but I'm actually talking a lot more about teaching and learning, research, the thinking behind it, and the reasons why we choose to do it. And when you can marry those things together, Abdul, that's where you really see, I think, and I've seen it in the schools I've worked in, where you can see teachers' workload go down, students being more knowledgeable, what the next steps in their learning are. It's more easily accessible. And if it's online as well, talking about ease of access and things, you can use tools like Immersive Reader or whatever you've got, your Reader, all these different things to make everything far more accessible for everybody. And that gives that equity of access as well.
Absolutely. I think I saw a really great example of a student actually using technology quite effectively. And the primary school child was solving a maths problem, and basically what they'd done is they'd just taken an image of the actual problem, put it on the device, and then they were annotating over the top. They were using Explain Everything, right? But it kind of just really made me think, right, that the power of, what we try and do as teachers is we're trying to figure out what's going on in the child's mind, right? And traditionally, especially when they've completed something and they've handed it in, we might be marking it at home or whatever it is, and we're trying to figure out, how did you do this and what was the thinking, and show me your working out and so on. So what was powerful about this was that the child was actually speaking, that's being recorded, the annotations are being recorded, like that's what Explain Everything does. And the whole concept, the child is kind of explaining their thought, their thinking, all that metacognition stuff. It's actually coming out, the right language is being used. You can measure the degree of confidence that the child was kind of exuding out of that. But at the same time, if there was misconceptions or something that wasn't right, that would have been captured as well. And then the child just uploaded it to Showbe. The teacher was able to watch it and then think. And I'm not saying that that's what all the children would do all the time, but to be able to have the tools that allow you to do that when you want to kind of measure, are there misconceptions? Are there things that need correcting? For me, that was quite powerful. And I think that for me was so powerful that it really made me actually think about, the way in which exams are being done as well, right? Because the technology now exists, but is there the willingness to actually change, the way we assess students over a period of time for something that's a lot more realistic, that's a lot more kind of real, and measures that. So that kind of approach that really impacts technology and it really impacts pedagogy, for me, is absolutely key.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But what we need, Abdul, and this goes back to that early point about teacher standards. It links into assessment and things with Ofqual and all the rest of it. We really need to see, and this isn't just in the UK. It's a global issue, and we need to see a change. It's all very well and good, the likes of you and me doing great things at grassroots, which lead us through to doing what we do now. But we need to see this on a national level, on a huge scale. And when now have we? If not now, when? Because we've we've seen the power, we've seen the impact it can have, we can see where it should be. So let's change the teacher standards. Let's look at how we can assess children differently. Not every child succeeds in an exam-based focused curriculum. Let's broaden these opportunities for our young people, so that not everyone wants to go to university. University isn't right for everybody. It's right for lots of people, but what about the technical curriculum, so forth and so on? And how does technology tie into all of this? So we can make those better opportunities for our young people, because I don't want to be getting all Carpenters and Michael Jackson on you, but we want to. It's a human race, and technology can really help us move forward and solve the problems of tomorrow. So what can we do as people in a place that we are? What can we do in our schools to make those changes? And I'll stop quoting Michael Jackson.
I'm going to a school, I think next week it is, where actually they are doing they're actually connecting with the real world. So they've got employers actually beaming into the classroom, doing workshops, speaking to them and so on, because we know that there's a logistical issue about bringing people in from the real world into the classroom, right? And I'm going just the bit that's kind of triggered this is the fact that maybe university isn't for everyone, and somebody wants to go into vocational stuff or something like that, or even for students that are going to university, the ability to kind of have a real world connection to employers, to people that are in the workplace, 20 minutes or 30 minutes from a real life person from their place of employment, being able to beam in and to inspire students that are interested in that particular field of work and so on. I think it's quite a powerful thing. And in some ways, I mean, I saw it at the school. It was no big deal. It was just somebody's kind of, they were using the Show Me Video Chat feature to kind of come in to the classroom, speak to students and so on. And I just thought to myself that, this really should be a feature in any school at a certain age to kind of inspire students. That connection between education, the classroom, and the real world doesn't really need to have that physical boundary anymore, because you can get people in, and there are more and more employers that are actually looking to kind of connect with students and connect with schools and to kind of inspire people into their industry and so on. But yet, it's not, we're kind of, as a system, we're not there yet with those simplistic connections that can have huge impact on the lives of children and make learning real.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's not that we're saying, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, obviously, but it's not that I'm saying this should be the be all and end all, but it should be part of the tapestry of the rich curriculum that children have as part of their experience in school, so that they can make informed decisions about the routes they want to take, so they can be inspired. It could be that they, are inspired by, their academics, but equally it could be that they could be inspired by something. I mean, to take Al as an example, who's joined us on the chat. I work with him at Net Support and what have you. But he's had, great career, lots of experience. As a software developer, could go into a school. I could really inspire that year 10 computing student to go on and develop that app, and he could be the next, Steve Jobs or whomever. You know what I mean? The next Abdul Chohan, and what have you. But it should be part of that tapestry, I think.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I mean, one of the things that certainly, I kind of experience in my own community here were parents that just couldn't afford the technology as well, right? So, I bumped into parents during lockdown where they were basically saying, well, the school is expecting online stuff to happen, and I've only got one computer at home. I'm working from home as well, so my computer's used. With the other computer is like, who's going to use that? And I can't afford to go out and buy things. And I think that kind of equity of access, along with a digital strategy that takes into consideration platforms that are focused on assessment, feedback, learning, communication with teachers, is that kind of equity of access is actually quite key. And it's nice to be able to see, I think Scotland have potentially a one-to-one program. I know Singapore during the second lockdown, I think I read something about, equipping students with access to technology and computers and so on. So I feel like, it's something that we certainly, and I know Wales, there's a lot of conversation going on in Wales and the Welsh government and so on, but I do feel that it's something that, something else that as a country we should kind of be looking at in terms of equipping children with access, and families with, to have access to learning regardless of schools being open or closed.
Yeah, I agree. This is one of the things that we thought about. I mean, you and I come from a similar kind of like heritage, in Apple iPad one-to-one deployments in our schools,
Yeah.
and these sort of things. And when we felt like, students shouldn't have to wait 3 weeks to put themselves in to get into the IT suite. And we, you want to be able to sort of use the technology in a moment when it's relevant for their learning. Just like you want students to, I remember when form tutor hat on, once a month or once every half a term, whatever, I'd check my students' pencil cases to make sure they had their rubber, their ruler, their protractor, their compass, their so forth and so on. And so children need this, with them all the time, their own to call their own, to work on. It's they're responsible for, they maintain, they look after it, take responsibility for it. That's what we should be looking at. But again, it goes back to things that it can't be us just saying this. It needs to be thought about at a national level. And not just on a granular sort of school level. All these things tying together, and unfortunately, the big part of it is it all needs money, doesn't it, Abdul?
Yeah, it does. It does.
We fortunately thought about the equity thing. We were able to what we did with our iPad one-to-one way back when, and it did involve parental contribution, sure. But for those students that were from less advantaged backgrounds who only had pupil premium, free school meal money, we would use that premium to come in, and we would use that to support them having the device they needed because they couldn't afford it otherwise. And that's where you get equity of access. But again, not every school, in primary schools have far smaller budgets compared to big secondaries, don't they? So, and then when you're looking at that sort of numbers, you don't necessarily enjoy the same economies of scale because you're not buying as big bulk and so forth and so on. But this is where maths can really come into.
Absolutely. And it's great to see some maths taking that step now, moving into that one-to-one environment. They've kind of, CEOs of maths, boards of maths are recognizing the fact that this access aspect is very real, and they're putting things into place for that. So I completely agree with you. And I do feel, yes, it is a finance thing, but, as far as technology is concerned now, I think we're at that point where even now schools exist where a lot of money has been spent on technology historically that has kind of disabled them to move away from it. It's going to be a big change. It needs, I think, a national focus, potentially a government focus. Maybe it should probably be part of the funding formula, that it's included as part of that. And technology has got to a point where actually, you can buy a device, it'll last you 3 years. So it's not just all in 1 year. And there's, potential other efficiencies might not offset the whole cost, but certainly things like printing, photocopying, all that kind of stuff can certainly change. And we've seen it, right? We work in schools, you're using platforms like Shobi, you're using platforms that allow you to do assessment and feedback digitally. It doesn't take away, the fact that you have to handwrite. Most devices now can scan and upload and all that kind of stuff and so on. So I think there is a workflow and an opportunity where kind of the traditional and the digital can exist side by side, and one can definitely complement the other, and definitely I think there's opportunities for efficiencies to be brought in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea about thinking differently is huge. I mean, if you've already got your technology in place, just think if you were to remove the need, and I remember you doing a calculation on this in one of the schools you worked with in previously, but if you remove the need for any photocopying in your school, that's like, that's a teacher's salary, or 2 teachers' salary, or like 5 teachers, 5 TAs, and who wouldn't want 5 more TAs in your school, sort of thing, So, if you could think differently and all of this, and you can make some huge impacts. But yeah. A joined up approach would be really, really welcome, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we've got great examples of organizations that have kind of gone ahead and done that in some ways, and kind of small scale. Now we're seeing Max coming along, kind of taking that approach as well, which is quite powerful. Mark, that things happened where I kind of look at my clock and it's like 30 minutes have gone. It kind of feels really weird when that happens, because you just start off and you think we're just getting started, and before you know it, it's like kind of
wasn't that the introduction, no?
Mate, it's been really, really good talking to you. Thanks for everyone for commenting as well. Thanks for all of you that have kind of joined us this evening, or you might be watching this later on. Always great to speak with Mark. I'm sure we will chat again in many places, and hopefully look forward to seeing you in person at some point, hopefully.
Yes, and yeah, well, I've had the invite up to come and join you for a barbecue, so we'll have to sort that out in the near future.
You are most welcome. We would definitely need to do that. Definitely need to do that. Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Be safe out there.
Thanks. Bye-bye.